Welcome to NUIC Football. I am your host, Kyle Kampmier. Joining me for the first time, and somebody that will be joining me weekly this season, is WIVC correspondent Logan Swan. Logan, thank you for joining the show, and I'm really excited to have you on a weekly basis as the season moves on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I felt like we talk on just about a daily basis during the football season. This always felt like the next step.
Yes, obviously it's a great thing, especially with the WIVC desperately wanting some additional coverage. So bringing you on will help open some of that up. But at the same time, I'm looking to move NUIC football not into anything more than what it already is, but providing a little bit more elaborate conversation around the state of Illinois, specifically classes 1A through 3A. That way we get more familiarity as we get headed through the season and into our playoff show, and then likewise into the playoffs where we like to meet up at Bloomington for the state championship games.
Be nice to have that happen again this year.
As we open the 2025 season, we have put out our NUIC and IFA preview shows. You can find those both on YouTube and on Spotify by searching NUIC Football. Give us a follow and subscribe to the channel. That way you get alerted anytime we have a new show hit that channel. Logan, we're going to take a look at some teams to watch around the state, touch base on the new HS ratings, formerly known as Cal Preps, as they continue to work with Max Preps, but with more detailed information as they continue to go out. And as you found out, and myself as well, they put that under a paid format this year.
It was quite the pricey $140 for me today, but it was well worth it in the long run.
All right, let's get started right after this.
Hey there, local high school football fans. This is Sean Considine, a Byron Tiger and Iowa Hawkeye alumni, and now an LPL financial advisor. I'm passionate about high school football because it's the purest form of the game where communities come together, lifelong character is built, and the love for football runs deeper than the scoreboard. You can find me in my Byron office most days until I run off to football practice. I'm happy to talk about football or the markets. I'll leave that up to you. I want to wish everyone across Illinois a safe, successful, and memorable high school football season. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC.
Need a fresh look? Look no further than Neff Paints, where quality meets craftsmanship. From gyms and locker rooms to living rooms and home projects, Neff Paints has you covered with top-tier products and expert service. Trusted by local pros and proud supporters of our area athletes, Neff Paints brings the durability, color, and finish that lasts. Ready to get started? Call Skylar at 815-541-7338 and take the first step toward your next transformation. Neff Paints, locally owned, community driven, quality you can see.
Logan, we're going to start in Class 1A, where arguably the class favorite falls on the shoulders of Lena Winslow. But there is a familiar foe, one that you're very familiar with multiple state appearances since 2018, and Camp Point Central sitting right behind them.
Yeah, Camp Point, they obviously lost Ginnenbacher, right? I mean, that's a tough loss. He could throw the ball last year, moving from fullback to quarterback, and I think it was like week 3 or 4. He was a 1,000-plus yard rusher still at the quarterback position while dueling with fullback. But they return the Riggs kid, Zach Ware, and of course, Cade Niekamp, who Lena Winslow fans are a little familiar with.
Yes, Cade Niekamp definitely stands out, especially with his state performance in the 2023 state championship game. Obviously a focal point of last year's team and will be once again this season as well. Taking a look at the HS ratings, Lena Winslow clearly sitting at number 1, a good almost 17 points ahead of the next team, which comes in NUIC rival Stockton, as the Blackhawks were 7-4 last season, bounced by Lena Winslow in the second round of the playoffs. 2 of those 4 losses coming by hand of Lena Winslow as well. They have a big team this year that returns a lot of starters as well, that they are looking to be more competitive, but also have thrusted themselves into not just the state ratings, but also our NUIC football preseason rankings as well.
Yeah, that week 2 matchup between Lena Winslow and Stockton, that might be the biggest game in 1A, maybe the whole year, because it truly probably decides the 1 seed in the North.
That's very possible. I mean, you got a bunch of teams that are
Yeah.
definitely going to be looking at those opportunities. Another nemesis that Stockton will have on schedule that they have not been able to get over as far as the NUIC is concerned is Dupec. Dupec, obviously, in their last year of the NUIC before they move into the Big Northern in the 2026 season. But that has been a game that Stockton's been close in each of the last 2 seasons. Now it has to be a must-win game if they truly want to contend for a conference championship. But that game comes later down the road, like you stated. The Week 2 game at Lena Winslow, to open up the new turf field at Lena Winslow, will definitely have the eyes of the state around that matchup.
It feels very similar to the Calhoun Camp Point Week 2 matchup. It's similarities. Lena Winslow was the runner-up last year. They beat Stockton in the second round. The previous year, Calhoun lost to Camp Point in the second round in their state run. And then last year, obviously, Calhoun played Camp Point Week 2, and as we talked about, a lot of people had their eyes on that game.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about that. Like you said, Calhoun was a team that we knew was going to be in the talk, in the conversation. They got that big win over Camp Point Central in Week 2. Unfortunately, it unraveled there once it got into the playoffs, but it was going to be a hard task for anybody to go up against Althoff Catholic, and we already saw what they did in the state championship game as well with that blowout win over Lena Winslow. But outside of that, Camp Point Central is locked in at the number 3 spot according to HS ratings. They're number 2 in our preseason state rankings as well. Give us a little bit more information on Camp Point Central based off of what you know already.
It's the basic. I know they have a little bit of a quarterback position battle between the Niekamp kid's brother Kale and Dylan Moen. I don't know who's going to win that. I know last year they started the Moen kid and then went to Niekamp before they originally decided to go with Genenbacher. The Curtis Riggs is one of the fastest kids in the entire conference. He is quick. He's got some great speed to him. He can really, really run. He was a thorn in our side in that quarterfinal game, right? And I think they're going to be pretty good. I mean, they're going to be really good. They lose us on the schedule. Let's look at their schedule, actually, real quick. Which one is it? Here we go, Camp Point. They play Winchester Week 1, who that could be a formidable game for them Week 1. That's a true test. Winchester lost, I think, a couple seniors to graduation. Obviously, losing Carson Brown, an all-state linebacker, is a big loss. But they returned their quarterback, and I know they got a bunch of sophomores who are very, very good coming up in the wings. And then Camp Point, they return according to high school ratings because Dixon puts us all in here. They return their top running back and top returning receiver. They did lose their top defender and top offensive line returner. Team strengths, they have 14 returning guys, running back depth, and they have 4-year D-line starter returns.
So out of their schedule, what do you find to be the biggest matchup that they have in the regular season here?
The week, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The week 6 matchup at home against Brown County to me is the one that stuck out. I know when I was on the Views from the West reaction podcast in week 8 last year, right after we played them, I talked about that Brown County team, and I just brought up how young they were. They had just lost to Camp Point, only 30-14. That's not truly a blowout. It was a tough game. They kept with them. It wasn't like they were outmatched. They just were young. They beat a Greenfield team who was, for most of last year, ranked in the NUIC state rankings, and then lost in a mud bowl to a 16-0 Casey Westfield team who was a quarterfinalist before they lost to Althoff, obviously, and they returned a bunch of guys this year as well.
Yeah, so it'll be pretty interesting as Camp Point Central looks to be just as formidable. And right now, the big favorite out of the South division or the South part of the bracket, if the playoffs were to start today. Clearly, they're not because we haven't played any games yet, but they are the early favorite to get back to Bloomington, which has definitely become the talk of your area, the Camp Point area, and all of Adams County as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Camp Point's not going to go away anytime soon. They got 60 kids in their program this year.
Yeah, that'll be very good for them. Number 4 is Newman Central Catholic. They were 8-3 last season, losing in the second round of the playoffs. Newman comes back, but they open up with a very tough schedule. They have perennial 3A power Princeton in week 1. Week 3, they see an Erie Prophetstown team that a lot of people that cover the Three Rivers Conference is expecting to be back in the playoff mix. Then they play Orion and Rockridge. Both teams, Orion missed the playoffs last year, looking to get back to the playoffs this year. Rockridge was in the playoffs last season before they lost in the second round. And then they have a week 7 game with Riverdale, who is looking to get back into the playoffs. They were 4-5 a year ago, and they're coming off. They're really rebuilding that Rams team to where some of the area people there think that Riverdale could be a 6 or 7-1 team this year. And then week 8 they have Kewanee. The Boilers are also looking to get back to the playoffs. And then they finish out with Monmouth Roseville, who was in the 3A playoffs a season ago. So not an easy schedule for the Comets here as they hope to get back to the playoffs. They got a lot of tough games on here to make that happen.
Yeah, the track's not exactly an easy conference, as some might say. It's gonna be a fun year for them, or the Three Rivers, I should say, not the track.
You can call it track. Same thing.
Track, yeah. Three Rivers, right? Newman, they lost to Gibson City in the second round, right? If I remember.
Yes, that was the case. GCMS beat them 28-0. Yep.
Yep. That's they return. I think they return a fair bit of guys. I can't remember how many they return, but they always seem to be a thorn in the side in 1A North. It doesn't seem like they're really ever going to go away. Coach LeMay's done a great job up there since taking over. I think they're going to keep it rolling. They're going to be another team to watch in the North.
And number 5 are the Galena Pirates. Galena was 7-5 last year, going 5-4 in the regular season, and then making a run to the quarterfinals. Another team out of the NUIC, not unfamiliar with seeing 5-4 teams making quarterfinal runs coming out of the NUIC. We've seen it happen a couple times over the last couple of years here. Galena being the latest before they lost to Leroy in that quarterfinal matchup. Galena has a new head coach this year with Kyle Knight, which we talked about in our NUIC preview show. But taking a look at their schedule, this is what is very interesting. It's one of the things that I stated on the live kickoff party show with View from the West this past weekend, was that you have teams that are right in the middle that are going to have to fight for wins. And Galena is going to be one of those teams that is definitely going to have to be in that mix. They open up with Morrison, which should go in Galena's favor, but Morrison still has a very speedy backfield. If they can find pieces to build along that line to help give their playmakers room in the open field, Morrison could be a surprise, but definitely not as hyped up as what they were coming into the NUIC last year. Week 3 is a tell-all game against EPC. They have to go on the road for that game. Then they follow that up with Dupac, Forreston in week 5, which Forreston is a team that was 2-7 last year, and they're looking to get back into the playoffs. Then they come back with Stockton in week 6, Lena Winslow in week 7, and then week 9 doesn't get any easier as they have Fulton sitting down there, and they have to go on the road to the Steamers. Fulton, a team that was 4-5 a season ago, basically really a couple plays away from being in the playoffs themselves last year.
Yeah, Galena, they returned Roman Romer, if I remember correct.
Yep.
He's a gamer. I remember watching. I love his name. I've loved watching highlights of him last year. They were really good. That was a sneaky 5-4 team. I can't remember who they played in the first round, but I think was it Stark County? Stark County.
It was Stark County. That was a back and forth game, actually.
Yep. That was a back and forth game. It was a close game. Then they would go on to play Ottawa Marquette, who completed an upset themselves and seed wise, and then they just ran into a good Leroy team that had 18, 19 seniors. That's tough to battle when you're a little younger in a spot you've never been before. Galena, I think, in this little middle that you have here, I like Galena coming out of the NUIC to be in the playoffs this year again.
Looking at that next team that we're talking about are the Leroy Panthers. They were 12-1 last year. You are correct. They had 18 seniors leading that team to a semifinal appearance before they lost to Lena Winslow. That was definitely a game that they had circled on their calendar, or at least the opportunity to play a team like Lena Winslow, knowing that that's exactly where they wanted to be. Coach BJ Zalesnik returns these guys. Right now, currently in the high school ratings, they sit at number 6. They've also showed up on our NUIC top 10 for the preseason state rankings as well. They too are going to have a very tall task as far as the HOIC is concerned. Some good games that they have. One of those coming right away in week 2 in one of the favorites in Class 2A with Tri-Valley sitting there. And they're going to have to go on the road to Downs. The interesting thing, these two teams used to be a co-op back in the day. So when we talk about Leroy being a 3A team in the early 2000s, it was Tri-Valley who was in that co-op with them. Then they dissolved the co-op to go on their own, Tri-Valley becoming a bigger school than what Leroy is now. So that's kind of interesting. But then they double that up in week 3 with a GCMS team who is not too far removed from back-to-back 2A state championships. Their enrollment has also dropped to the point where they're now stabilized in Class 1A. And then they have an interesting matchup down in week 8 too, where they'll play host to Forreston. And like I said, Forreston, a team that we're expecting to get back in the playoffs, that being just another tough game for the Cardinals on their schedule in front of them.
Yeah, Leroy, they're always good. They were always. I remember in the mid 2010s when them and Carrollton were going at battles. It felt like every year. Obviously losing 18 seniors plus the Zalesnik boy whose name escapes me, but he's a really good quarterback. I remember that much from that triple option offense. Their first 2 out of 3 games being Downs, Tri-Valley, and Gibson City, really it'll paint a picture of where they are and kind of what their season might look like, considering the quality of team that we expect both teams to be.
Yes, for sure. Bo Zalesnik was his name. That's who you're looking for. That was the quarterback.
Yep.
But yes, no, it'll be interesting to see what Leroy can do. Obviously, their experience the last couple of years. 2 years ago, they lost to Althoff. Was it? Yes, because they were in the South bracket 2 years ago, and then last year they came into the North bracket where they got to meet up with Lena Winslow. So they've built some experience over these last 2 seasons that will hopefully help build what their program is to get it back to where it once was. They've gone in the right direction of that. Coach Zalesnik and his entire coaching staff is a great group of young guys that continue to get the best out of their young men on the team playing for them, and definitely think that they'll have the opportunity to continue that as the season rolls on. But speaking of teams in the HOIC, the next team that we're talking about is Gibson City. Melvin Sibley and the Falcons come back off of a 10-2 season last year where they lost in the quarterfinals to Lena Winslow as well. And, you take a look at their schedule. Their first big game is that week 3 game against Leroy. And outside of that, week 6 against DMAC might be their next toughest game. And I'll take that back for a minute, because week 4 they also have El Paso Gridley in a cross-divisional game too. So that will be a big one there for GCMS. So really, they got 3 games on their schedule against some good competition, almost coming from that weeks 3 through 6. But this looks to be a pretty favorable schedule for the Falcons this year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Obviously, that Leroy game sticks out, and Deer Creek always seems to be hanging around the playoffs, no matter what their record is or what year it is. Sometimes they can make a run in a few games, and other years, sometimes it's just one and done. And then El Paso Gridley obviously is a team that they could have some issues with, but they should be all right. It does seem like a pretty favorable schedule, all things considered.
Moving down the way is KZ Westfield, a team that you already mentioned here, bringing back a lot of kids. I think it was like 20 or 18 to 20, 18 starters returning
18,
off
19.
of a team that went 10-2. They lost in the quarterfinals last year to Brown County, 16-0. And with that, the Warriors and Coach Fritchnich open up the year against Fisher. But then Tuscola is another team that we are expecting to be somewhat good this year. And outside of that, you have another team down the way. Week 7 is Mount Carmel, a team that was just in the state championship here like 2 years ago. Richland County was in the 4A playoffs just a season ago as well. So, KZ Westfield has a very good schedule here, but we should see the Warriors continue the success that they're back on and could throw themselves into being a major player in that South bracket. As you take a look, depending on where the line splits, you could see Leroy bounce back into the South bracket. But if they don't, KC Westfield's that number 2 team that you're looking at as being a major player to Camp Point Central to get back to Bloomington.
Yeah, they've had a great last 2 years. 2 years ago, they lost in the second round on a last-second touchdown and 2-point conversion to Greenfield, who would go on to play in the semifinals against Camp Point. And then last year, they were a quarterfinalist team, and they just happened to run into Althoff like everyone else did. I think they're going to be a really good team. That week 2, is it week 2? Am I wrong about that? Yes, week 2 against Tuscola on the road. That's an interesting game. I know Tuscola was fairly young last year, and they got in at 5-4. I'll be interested in seeing how that one kind of trickles out, because Tuscola is a team that not too long ago was the talk of 1A South.
Yeah, they really fell off here in recent years, and like you said, Coach Romine, 5-5 last year. They definitely have the opportunity to get back to a healthy place. But when you take a look at their schedule, they got some tough games there for the Warriors. And this is part of the reason why they're really not they were on our top 20 teams to watch list, but they haven't broken into the top 10 state rankings. They're not a team that we're really looking at as far as being one of the top 15 teams in the state. But they could be if they can pull off some wins. You have some games against KC Westfield week 2. They play Tri-Valley in week 3. They have Paxton Buckley Loda in week 5. And PBL was a 3A playoff team a year ago, and now they're going to drop into 2A with an enrollment deduction there. And then they have Leroy sitting down there in week 9 as well. So that'll be interesting to see, because you have 2 other teams that can kind of be playoff contenders. Shelbyville in week 1, Clinton in week 4. Clinton's never really been a big player, but we've seen Shelbyville make some deep runs in recent years as well. It's going to be a tough path to get 5 wins for Tuscola. There's definitely a path there, but that's not where Coach Romine wants to be. Obviously, he wants Tuscola to be back in that 7-8 win column.
Yep.
Get that bigger seed so that they can be a player in the Class 1A South bracket. They're going to have a tough road, though, to get there.
Yeah, it's a difficult schedule, but I also don't think you would also schedule a schedule like this if you weren't semi-confident in your team's ability to play up to competition and maybe surprise some people.
That's true. You got a point there, and we'll see what it holds for the Warriors this year. But the next team on high school ratings list at number 9 are the Calhoun Warriors. Talking about Warriors, team that you're very familiar with. Coach Elmore obviously lost some good seniors last year. With that, they returned some significant numbers too. They are the favorite right now in the WIVC South. And when you take a look at their schedule, you know, they got some tough games down the road, but more so in the second half of the game. There's no reason why they shouldn't start off 4-0 before they head into that Week 5 game with West Central in Winchester. Then you have a good rivalry game with Greenfield Northwestern. Obviously, GNW, not a team that we're really high on this year as we have been the last couple years, but they've definitely been the team to beat in the WIVC South the last couple years. Carrollton is definitely a team that we've been looking at, talking about, and then you have Routt and Brown County after that.
Yeah, it's a pretty favorable schedule for Calhoun early on, right? You get your first 4 games, they look to be very winnable. And then that Week 5 matchup on the road at Winchester, that's their real first big test going into that second half of that season. But the game that I'll have my eye on, because I'm just very high on them, we're going to talk about them in here in a second, is Brown County. They played Week 8 last year, and it was a final of 31-16, but it was not a 2-score game. It was a dogfight for 95% of the game till the very end. Never can count out Greenfield and Carrollton. Both those teams have an interesting path to the playoffs, and it's not exactly easy because it looks a little rough for them. And then you have Jacksonville Routt, who lost a big senior class, including the Kelton Crevison kid, Olson, and the Lotman kid, among some others. So Calhoun going into Week 9 should be looking at least 8-0 or 7-1.
So Calhoun lost to Camp Point Central in that rivalry game in the quarterfinals last year. Don't have to play Camp Point Central this year until they meet up in the playoffs, which could be a high possibility. Taking a look at where both teams start in 2025. Logan, coming in at number 10 are the Hornets of Brown County, a team that we saw finish 6-5 last year. Before losing in the second round of the playoffs to KZ Westfield, as you mentioned earlier on the show when we were talking about KZ, 16-0 in that game. Obviously, there's a lot of things that Coach Little has coming back with Brown County, as you stated, a good returning nucleus of players that they have here, and you know, with that, the experience of getting to the second round of season to go. But when you take a look at their schedule, they open up with Carrollton, a big game to open up with there. But then you have games in Week 6 with Camp Point Central, a big rivalry game there. And then Calhoun in Week 9, and a Routt team there in Week 3. But outside of that, this is a very favorable schedule for Brown County. And another reason why a lot of people are looking at the Hornets to be a player in the 1A South bracket, let alone being a team that can definitely compete in the WIVC North this season too.
Yeah, I'm very high on them. They started out 0-2 last year and got into the playoffs, and arguably you could have argued they should have won their first 2 games. They were a final score of 6-0 and 10-7, if I recall. 6-0 Week 1 to Greenfield after a long lightning delay all night, and then 10-7 to Winchester in Week 2. Both playoff teams. They would all go on to beat Greenfield in the first round of the playoffs. That Brown County team it took them time to gel. They were young, and they had to figure things out. The one game you didn't mention that I think is one to keep an eye on is that Week 4 game at Mendon Unity. Mendon was a 4-5 team last year, all losses to playoff teams. They returned 13 seniors on top of their quarterback being one of them, and I think he's a 3-year starter now. That's definitely a game to keep an eye on for them because it could be tough, especially on the road, Week 4. But I would expect by then that there will be a fairly well-oiled machine given what they have coming back.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. You're right. Coach Woodworth at Unity Payson has a team that returns a lot of talent. I remember you talking to me about that before. They, too, have a pretty tough schedule there. Carrollton, Brown County, Camp Point Central, West Central, and then GNW. But still a good pathway for them to improve on that 4-5 record a season ago. That would most likely put them in the 2A playoffs as well if they can get to that 5-win mark. So it'll be interesting to see what Unity does. But right now, taking a look at Class 1A, Brown County, that's definitely a good precursor game for them, as you stated. So it'll be interesting to watch that one play out. The next team on the Class 1A list are the Carrollton Hawks, another team out of the WIVC South, one that you're very familiar with. Carrollton last year was 7-4. Coach Flowers getting the Hawks to the second round of the playoffs before they lost to Althoff Catholic as well, a team that nobody is sad to see go. But, Carrollton, day 2, like we already stated, open up with Brown County. A big rivalry game with GNW in Week 3, West Central in Week 4, Calhoun in Week 7. So there again, Coach Flowers and the Hawks, I'm not exactly sure all of what they return. Maybe you can highlight some of that. But at the same time, they have a pretty favorable schedule to see them get a pathway back to the playoffs as well.
Yeah, they return about 11 to 12 starters, combining both offense and defense, if I recall. One of them being the quarterback. And I believe they're removing one of their slot guys. I think it's Charlie Stumpf is his name. He'll be at the halfback position now for him in the backfield. That's a very... Those first 4 games are... That is not an easy start for anyone. You have Brown County, who was ranked... Who we've already talked about and was ranked. A tough Mendon team who's going to be senior laden and can surprise you. And then you have Winchester and Greenfield, and those games are never easy. 2 years ago, Carrollton beat Winchester on that 5-0 start, and then last year they lost to them 12-7. They've competed with Greenfield the last 2 years, and I think this Carrollton team is in a really good spot to be in that second or third spot in the South. If you're continuing to think of Calhoun as the favorite, then Winchester, Carrollton, I think those two are going to be going at it. They returned 2 of their wide receivers and 3 linemen, is what it was. I believe one of their wide receivers, Stumpf, was moving to halfback. They do have a fairly generous schedule when you look at Beardstown and Triopia in week 8 and 9. So they just got to find a way to get to that 5th win, and I think they'll be a playoff team with having enough points.
The number 12 team to watch in Class 1A, Arthur Lovington, Atwood Hammond. The Knights were 9-2 last season in Class 2A. They'll likely drop back into Class 1A this year. Taking a look at some of the teams they play, not a lot of notable teams, but one that stands out on their list as a perennial playoff contender are the Cumberland Pirates. They faced them in Week 3. Sullivan split off and dissolved their co-op with Okaw Valley. They are running as themselves this year. And there's a lot of people down in the Central Illinois part of the state that expects Sullivan to be a major player, not just in the Central Illinois Conference, but altogether in the overall picture, and could be a surprise player in Class 2A potentially. We'll have to see, but they have a lot of returning talent there. One that I'm really surprised by, Arcola is now in a co-op, and I can't remember, was it Cerro Gordo that they're going in a co-op with?
Yep.
So that opens up their Week 8 game that was initially scheduled with Cerro Gordo. So now they have a Week 8 opening. But another team to watch out for, too, is Nokomis on that schedule. Nokomis has been able to do some things here recently. So we'll see how that transpires for Ala. I'm not sure what they return. They've never made it deep enough in the playoffs for me to get good information on. But it'll be interesting to see how their schedule plays out.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The Toledo Cumberland will be an interesting one. That Nokomis game, I think Nokomis returns a fair bit of guys. That's an interesting one to me, especially week 7. Yeah, week 7. That's an interesting one.
The 13th team to watch for in Class 1A are the Fulton Steamers. They were 4-5 last year coming out of the NUIC. Like we stated already, they had a couple games that kind of got away from them, that kept them out of the playoff field, but they look to be as another team in the NUIC with the potential opportunity to get into the playoffs. You couple that with the 3 previous mentioned teams we've already talked about in Lena, Winslow, Galena, and Forreston. Forreston not making this list, but definitely a team to watch. But then you have Eastland Pearl City in 2A and Durham Pectonica Dupec in 3A. This will be a tall task for Fulton as they open up right out of the gates with some tough games. They have EPC, Dupec, Forreston, Stockton, and Lena Winslow all in the first 5 weeks of the season to open up. You combo that with Galena sitting there in week 9, and then they have a week 7 matchup with Southwestern and East Dubuque out of Hazel Green, Wisconsin. East Dubuque, a former member of the NUIC in football, still a conference member, but now in a co-op playing Wisconsin football, led by former Lena Winslow state champion Joe Edler. And Southwestern East Dubuque made the Wisconsin state playoffs last year. So not an easy game, nor an easy schedule for the Steamers here, as if you take a look at their overall schedule, there's basically 2 games on here that are probably good wins, but one of them is a rivalry game with Morrison. That never comes easy, regardless of which team is good or bad in this said season. And they're going to have to find a way to make some wins happen here.
That's their first 5 weeks. That I beg anyone to find a harder first 5 weeks in a team in small school football than this.
Yeah, it's pretty loaded for the Steamers. Be interesting to see what Coach Lower and his team can do there. Moving on, Cesar-Valier, Waltonville. Coach Wingo was 8-3 a season ago. They are the 14th team to watch. They have a fairly easy schedule, so to speak. They have Fairfield in week 4. They have White County in week 6. And then Johnston City in week 9. Should be another successful season for Cesar-Valier when you take a look at the grand scheme of things here. But they got some teams that are there that have been in the playoffs here in recent years too, that are also looking to get back there too.
Yeah. Johnston City week 9 game every year seems to be the one that kind of decides where they get slated in that 1A for them, and then Johnston City in 2A where they get slated in that bracket, because both are always have great records, always seem to be as a team to keep an eye on. Maybe they'll do. They were a quarterfinal team a few years ago. They were a second round team last year in Cesar-Valier, and in Johnstone, that we'll talk about a little later, they went to the semifinals last year. So definitely a team to keep watch on if things break right for them.
And then the last team we're going to talk about in Class 1A are the Cumberland Pirates, who we've already touched base on a little bit. Coach Watkins coming off of an 8-3 season last year where they lost in the second round. They have a pretty easy schedule when you take a look at the big picture. Week 3 matchup with Ala will be a tough one. Again, with Sullivan sitting there in week 7. Like I said, a team that we don't know a whole lot about, but they were a playoff team a season ago with Okaw Valley, now on their own. Nakoma sitting there in week 8. And then week 9, the Cerro Gordo game, which is now going to be an opening with their recent co-op with Arcola.
Yeah, that's a pretty favorable schedule for them. They always seem to be in the talks about the playoffs, whether it's at 5-4 or what was it last year, 7-2. They finished 8-3 after winning one game. Another team that you can just keep an eye on. They're always good for a playoff win, and if the bracket breaks right, they could always make a run.
They can. We haven't really seen a whole lot of playoff success out of them, but like you said, they're always a team that tends to find their way into the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. We're going to have Class 2A coming up right after this break.
Thinking about buying or selling a home? Trust the team that knows this area better than anyone. Best Realty. Whether you're looking for your first home, upgrading for more space, or relocating, Best Realty is committed to making the process smooth, honest, and successful. With deep roots in our local communities and a track record of results, Best Realty isn't just in the business of homes, they're in the business of helping families take the next step. Best Realty. Local experts, real results, real people. Call today and move with confidence. Need a logo, website, or standout graphic design? Check out Nick at Volkert Design, your go-to for high-impact branding and design solutions. With over 20 years of experience serving businesses across Northern Illinois and Chicagoland, Nick delivers best-in-class websites, logos, and graphics that get noticed. Whether you're a startup or an established name, Volkert Design brings your vision to life. Visit Volkert.design today to see the difference top-tier design makes.
Life comes with a lot of big decisions, from protecting your home and family to planning for the future. That's where Tyler Hoffman with Country Financial comes in. As a local agent, Tyler knows our community and is committed to helping you build a plan that's right for you. Give Tyler Hoffman a call today at 815-248-2188 or stop by his office in Durand. Tyler Hoffman with Country Financial, protecting what matters most. Welcome back. In Class 2A, last year's state runner-up Maroa Forsyth enters as the early favorite, but Class 2A could be the most vulnerable class in 2025, where we could see a surprise team become a favorite like we saw with Chicago Christian a season ago. You couple that with a Tri-Valley team that is also very high in the talks, and a Farmington team that is coming off of a semifinal appearance, and they had 100-some kids on their roster last year, gaining valuable experience in that run. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what makes the rest of 2A come alive here. You have a couple teams here that are also dropping into 2A from 3A last year, such as Paxton Buckley Loda. And let's not be remiss about a Nashville team that were 2A state runner-ups in 2019 and 2021 as they make their way back into the Class 2A field as well. And then further down the road, we're taking a look at a Peotone team that was in the playoffs a season ago in 3A. They are also most likely going to fall back into the 2A fold too.
Yeah, 2A is definitely the one that's definitely the outlier in terms of strengths. You obviously have your top two teams in Maroa and Tri-Valley, and then it's kind of who will be that next team or two to take a spot. Will it be a team like Rockridge or an EPC? That answer is to be determined. You have Farmington there. PBL is one to keep your eye on. I can't remember that name of the conference they're in, but that conference between those 2A and 3A schools every year seem to be doing really well. With like Tolono Unity, St. Joe Ogden, that conference is really good, and they were 3A last year, and they went 7-4. So they won one playoff game, and then lost in the second round. Right? PBL might be that third team that kind of creeps up on people that no one's talking about. Nashville's obviously one that's had some success in 2A, a couple state runner-ups, a couple semifinals in the last few years. Again, just not the top end quality is just not as good as 1A, but there could be some surprises, and I'd like to think there will be one this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. The conference that you're talking about with PBL is the Illini Prairie.
Yep.
And you're gonna when we go to 3A, you're gonna hear a lot of familiar teams and schools that we're gonna talk about in that 3A field that come out of that Illini Prairie Conference. So no surprise that we're talking about PBL, as they have about 6 teams in that conference that can all make some pathways to the playoffs as they did a season ago. But we're going to start off with Tri-Valley. Right now, when you take a look at high school ratings, they are sitting at number 1. Our NUICFootball.com state rankings had Maroa ranked number 1 with Tri-Valley right behind them. Here we are just flip-flopped around. So, like you said, a lot of the talk that we've heard so far in the preseason is about Tri-Valley and Maroa Forsyth and being the top 2 teams. But let's not dismiss Farmington either, because when you take a look at these ratings, they're right there with less than a 2-point differential of both these teams, which tells you, figuratively speaking, that they're going to be one of the major players in Class 2A as well.
Yep. They were they were a quarterfinalist last year, or was it semifinals?
Which one?
Farmington.
Farmington was in the semifinals
Yep.
last year. They lost that close game with Chicago Christian 34-20.
Yeah, that's right. And that should tell you kind of the quality of team they were. Obviously, Chicago Christian kind of ran away with that state 2A title game against Maroa. Things just kind of got out of hand up there in Bloomington that day for the Maroa Forsyth Trojans. But Farmington will be a team to watch. They always seem to be right in the thick of things in their conference. Always a good team. Coach Vallis, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right, does a great job there, and they're going to be a team to watch.
Yep, so we'll talk about the Farmers here momentarily, but let's get back to Coach Roop and Tri-Valley. They were 9-2 last year, and some could argue that they probably lost earlier than expected, but that loss did come at the hands of the eventual state champion Chicago Christian Knights. Tri-Valley had entered as a 3 seed, as a 8-1 team. Chicago Christian was the 6 seed, also an 8-1 team. Not surprised by the outcome, but Tri-Valley was a team that was talked about more regularly throughout the season up until that second round matchup, with Chicago Christian winning that game 24-14. So it's not like Chicago Christian ran away with it. It's just the fact that Tri-Valley had to take down a Bloomington Central Catholic team, one of those teams out of that Illini Prairie Conference we were just talking about. And then they met up with Chicago Christian, who we didn't know a whole lot about. I mean, we knew some of the players, right? We knew that they were going to be good. They sat in our state rankings all year round. We're the only media to have Chicago Christian in our state rankings from the very onset of the season in the preseason. Nobody else outside of our outlet was even looking at them. So it was awesome to somewhat see them take what was a 5-5 team from a season ago with a humiliating first-round loss to Maroa Forsyth, albeit, to then turn it around with a new head coach, go 13-1, and then beat Maroa Forsyth for the state championship game. And now they're hit with the multiplier, and we'll touch base on this later, but they are going to get bumped into the 3A field, but traditionally a 2A school there in Chicago Christian. So, short words, they're one of the few private schools that I actually could see getting punished, but unfortunately that's the rules that fall into place, and I think that IHSA did a great job with putting that multiplier back in place with a little bit stricter guidelines on it.
Yeah, we'll touch base on the multiplier a little bit later, but the changes the IHSA made to it was a very good step in the right direction, and I think you're going to see a lot of the issues that we had before start to go away.
All right, so Tri-Valley, they have a Week 2 matchup with Leroy at home. We already talked about that when we were talking about Leroy, so I don't want to touch too much on that. Week 5, though, they have a home game with El Paso Gridley. That should be, or could be, a pretty good game as well. Right now, Tri-Valley would be a 2-touchdown favorite over El Paso Gridley when you take a look at these preseason ratings. But with that, a pretty favorable schedule for the Vikings here in Coach Roop to open up 2025.
Yeah, definitely a favorable schedule. The other game that to keep a close eye on is that Week 9 matchup against Eureka. They went 9-2 last year in 3A. They were a good team. They always seem to be towards the top end of 3A record-wise. Just another tough game to end the regular season, but to gear up for the playoffs.
That's a good point. When you take a look at the HOIC, Eureka would be the second team favored behind Tri-Valley this year. Right now, Tri-Valley opens up the season as a touchdown favorite over Eureka, so great point there. Good job, Logan. All right, Maroa Forsyth, state runner-ups a season ago. They were 12-2, lost 47-0 to Chicago Christian, as we already stated, coming out of the always tough Sangamo Conference. But something that we've seen here in recent years is the Sangamo has had state representation with Athens, Maroa Forsyth. Williamsville isn't too far removed from a state championship either. So, like I said, always a tough conference. But are they going to be as tough this year as we think that they will be? That's always the hard part, because when we talk about 3A, we talk about like Williamsville on a regular basis. They don't even crack the top 10 in a very loaded 3A field when we get to that. But Maroa Forsyth definitely comes in this season as a huge favorite in the Sangamo, where they're a touchdown favorite over the entire field right now. And looking down the schedule, they're an even bigger favorite over the lesser teams of the Sangamo Conference.
It seems like it's Maroa and then everybody else, right? Maroa, Williamsville, and then who's that third team going to be? Because in years past it was Athens, but they started to taper off a little bit last year. Is it in Auburn? Is it New Berlin? Or Olympia? It's to be determined who that third team in that conference will be. So it seems like that Week 8 matchup between them and Williamsville at Maroa is going to decide the conference there.
And it will be interesting because I think that there's a lot of people in the Athens area that are thinking that they will be back in the mix this year. They had a younger team last year coming off of that team that got to state. They lost a lot of seniors. Last year's team was more of a rebuild than a reload year. But now with a little bit more experience and a lot of returning players, they definitely expect to be back up where they once were. And if they do, with their enrollment now under 300, have a high probability of falling back into that Class 1A field. And if they make the playoffs, while they're not on our Class 1A teams to watch list, they're definitely a team to watch out for, because with the strength of the conference that they do play in, once they get into that 1A field, they could definitely make some major noise, regardless if they're 5-4, 6-3, or 7-2.
Athens being able to return to their standard of what they have. If that does happen, if people are expecting that, I won't doubt that. I haven't heard, but that 2-7 season being an apparition or a blimp on the map, I could definitely believe that. Coach Knox does a great job there. They've made numerous deep playoff runs in the quarterfinals, semifinals. Obviously, we're state runner-ups not too long ago to Wilmington in 2A. Them getting back, and especially like you said, their enrollment now brings them more than likely into 1A. That's a team no one in 1A South truly wants to deal with, because they're always a tough out.
Yeah, so it'll be great to see. Obviously, the Maroa Forsyth Williamsville matchup sitting there in Week 8 will be the big matchup that a lot of people will talk about. I'll have to take a look at my schedule. I've always said I wanted to get down to the Boyd to see a game. And I don't know what I have on my schedule for that October 17th date, but that could be the day that I could make that trip down to Maroa to watch that game. That'd be pretty cool if I can make that happen. And you're not wrong. So obviously the Sangamo has put Athens and Maroa Forsyth in back-to-back state championship games, both coming away with runner-up finishes. But like we said, always a very tough conference and a lot of fun to keep track of and watch. Moving on to Farmington, the Farmers finished last season at 12-1. Coach Toby Vallis getting the Farmers to the semifinals for the first time in school history. They're looking to reload, not rebuild. They do lose some key players from last year's team, but they also return some key players from last year's team. And if you remember correctly, they were a 2A school with 103 participants on their roster a season ago. And, of course, that was freshman through senior, so that's program-wide. But still, remarkable numbers for a 2A school nonetheless. And hopefully they can continue to build on that success that they put together last year. Taking a look at where they land in 2A in the preseason stuff, like I said already, arguably one of the favorites again. And they would be sitting for sure in 2A North, where, you know, you got that line split. We've seen Maroa go north. We've seen them go south. We've seen Tri-Valley go north. We've seen Tri-Valley go south. So it'll be interesting to see where that line breaks off. But Farmington definitely a little bit further north than those two schools. Always a north team, it seems like, with that cutoff. And taking a look at their schedule here, Elmwood Brimfield in week 2. Eureka in a non-conference game in week 3. Rova Williamsfield in week 7 in a non-conference game. And then week 9 has Bureau Valley. Bureau Valley is new to the conference this year as they left the Three Rivers Conference to go into the Lincoln Land Conference. New head coach there as well, as Pat Elder takes over Bureau Valley now. Pat Elder, with a lot of experience at the state level, once took Richmond Burton to the state championship game, was in the IFA state championship game just a couple years ago with Ridgewood as well. Used to also coach at Sherrard. Always able to build a program from where they were at and make them more successful. It's kind of become a niche for him, but interesting to see that matchup. But Farmington, in my opinion, based off of current success and experience, would be the hands up on this conference. And realistically, while it's a tougher schedule, they're a favorite to go 9-0 this year in the regular season if they can come and show up and replace some of the key players that they had a season ago that they lost their graduation.
Yep, like you said, they had 103 kids out for their team last year. That's depth that you can't, that at the small school level, especially if it's quality depth, that's unmatched because most schools have guys going both ways, right? And being able to keep guys fresh, especially on the line, if you can keep guys fresh, that's a huge difference maker. Their first two out of three games being Elmwood and Eureka being the latter half of that. That's a good litmus test for them. Elmwood was a playoff team last year, and so was Eureka. And then you follow that up with an Illini West team who was a playoff team after starting out 0-3 and finished the year 6-4.
Yep, 100% agree there. So it'll be interesting to see what Farmington can do. Like I said, a team to watch for in Class 2A. As we said at the beginning, very vulnerable Class 2A this year. Speaking of vulnerable in Class 2A is Paxton Buckley Loda. Like we already stated, they made the second round of the Class 3A playoffs last year. This year, their enrollment comes in at 382, well below the projected cutoff, currently sitting at 421 for Class 2A. Taking a look in the Illini Prairie Conference, as we already discussed, a very tough conference. You know, they have an opportunity to get to the playoffs, Looking at their schedule, they open up with Bloomington Central Catholic in week 1, followed by St. Joe Ogden in week 2. Prairie Central sits there in week 4. Tolono Unity in week 7. Monticello in week 9. Definitely not the gauntlet that you want to go through. They do have at least some reprieve throughout where they have a tough game, and then they get into maybe a easier game before another tough game, easy game, tough game, easy game, tough game. So very well balanced schedule for PBL and Coach Pritchard here. But at the same time, they have 4 teams in their conference favored above them, and then the one team that's favored or is sitting below them is a Prairie Central team that went 5-5 last year, also making the playoffs. And they're really, it's like a potential 3-point differential, which makes it really a toss-up game when you look at it in that regard. But clearly, Tolono Unity, Monticello, St. Joe Ogden are the 3 teams that are set to be the conference leaders in the Illini Prairie. And BCC is not that far behind those 3.
No, they all seem to make their way into the playoffs every year, and all seem to be very capable of winning multiple playoff games every year. Tolono Unity and Monticello played in the semifinals against each other last year. Tolono beat St. Joe's Ogden last year, who beat them in the regular season. St. Joe's was 10-0 before that game, and they lost in the second round. It's a very tough conference. They do have a nice balance of tough game, a game that you can work through some things and find a little bit more of your identity. But those tough games are where you find that grit and you build what you're going to be having to deal with when you're down the line in like the playoffs.
So another team to look at is Rock Ridge. The Rockets were 8-3 last season. Coach Graves got these guys to the second round of the playoffs. They too lost a lot of good players, and I was talking to their quarterback Cullen Schweigen this past weekend at the live show in Moline, and while they all expected them to somewhat be down this year, they're very excited with the players that they have to fill in those roles. They've definitely gone through a big growth over the course of the season as well, or off season, I should say, to make themselves prepared for this season. Not an easy schedule by any stretch of the imagination for the Rockets. They open up with Sherrard. Sherrard's a team that is trying to make some noise once again, hopefully getting back to the playoffs. Princeton, a 3A perennial power there in week 2. Week 3, you have Riverdale, a team that is going to be fighting to get into the playoffs. Week 4, another team that a lot of people are expecting to be a playoff team in Erie Prophetstown. Week 5 is Newman Central Catholic, a team that we've already talked about here in the Class 1A ratings. And then you also have Monmouth Roseville sitting there in Week 8, a team that was in the 3A playoffs and looking to get back to the 3A playoffs again this year, and could potentially be one of the favorites in the other side of the track division.
Yeah, Rock Ridge, they were a solid team last year. You talked about their quarterback, Ray Cullen. I've watched some of his highlights from X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. That kid can play. He's a great football player, a better baseball player from my understanding. It's not exactly the easiest schedule in the world, but there's wins on here that they can get. They'll be challenged most weeks than not, but a very formidable Rock Ridge team that we expect to be good again.
Yeah, and as you said, Schweigen's getting a lot of baseball looks. Only going to be a junior this year. Already getting looks from ISU and UIC. UIC has been big on as far as communicating with them. So, in that live show, Cale Filler said that, Orion quarterback Cale Filler, just to be precise, stated that Schweigen has a big arm both on the football field and on the baseball diamond. Cullen Schweigen, big-time playmaker for Rock Ridge, returning. Taking a look at the next team, we have the Eastland Pearl City Wildcats. Once again, a team that kind of underperformed last year when it got to the playoffs. It was a team that we were definitely high on early in the season, and even heading into the playoffs, expecting to be healthy again. They weren't truly fully 100% healthy, but they did meet a tough match with Rock Ridge in that first round game, closing out the season at 7-3. But here they are, looking to open up 2025 rated number 5 in the high school rating system. And, they got some big games right out of the gates. They have to open up with Fulton, a team that we've already talked about as being a team to watch for in Class 1A. EPC right now is going to open up as a touchdown favorite in that game. And then they have games with Galena in Week 3, Week 5 with Dupac, Week 6 with Forreston, Week 7 Stockton, Week 8 Lena Winslow. So not an easy schedule by any stretch of the imagination here for EPC. And when you take a look at how these games rank out, right now EPC does look like they would be the front runner to a 7-win season here if everything can hold true.
Yeah, they were a really good team last year. Like you said, they were a little banged up right when the playoffs started and lost to that Rockridge team in Schweigen. They look to be just as good as last year, if not maybe a little better, but that speaks to the volume of how good the NUIC is every year, right? A 7-2 team out of the NUIC is not your average 7-2 team.
That's true. That is very true. We win those matchups more times than we don't, that's for sure. But last year EPC losing that game to Rockridge. Rockridge then losing a tough game as well the very next week in the playoffs to, who was it? Was it Chicago Christian they lost to?
Was it them or Farmington?
I don't remember. I'm too far back. I was looking at the wrong year. But that's all right. Either way, you're right. It was Farmington. Yes, Farmington. They lost to Farmington. Tough game, 14-10. EPC's definitely got a lot to build on. They got some great playmakers back. Zy Haverland was just named as one of the top receivers to watch in the Rockford area. He's at tight end this year. Running back Draven Zier has 1,500 yards. Looking for another big breakout season again this year. And if he can get into space and make plays happen, they're going to have some success there. They are going to go with a sophomore QB this year that a lot of people are very high about as well. So we'll see how everything transitions. But, they're still going to have a big, strong line with Vaguely and Burchin on there and a very strong linebacking core, again, with Haverland and Burchin and Brody Simons. Brody Simons is going to become the new fullback this year, too. So it'll be very interesting to see what kind of playmaking EPC can have here. But look for them to be more of a power-style team, although McNutt does like to run a spread-style offense. Even if you spread it out, if you can establish a power run game, you're going to find more success too. Nashville, the Hornets were 10-2 last year in Class 3A before losing in the quarterfinals. Like you said earlier, a team that we're accustomed to seeing in the 2A state championship game just here not too long ago, returning to the Class 2A field as their enrollment has dropped well below 400, down to 359 students this year, which definitely puts them well within the 2A field. They, too, come back with a very, very favorable schedule this year. Taking a look at this schedule, they're going to be pretty much a 10-point favorite or better over every team on their schedule. So no reason why Nashville, we could not see them going 9-0 this year.
Yeah, Nashville's always seems to be a player in 2A. I think it was when Athens made the state, whenever Athens made state 2 years ago now, they lost to them in the semifinals on that field goal. They always seem to be right in the thick of things in 2A, no matter what their record is or who they have to play or what year it is. I expect them to be able to make a deep run in 3A South, or not 3A, 2A South again, and I would not be shocked if Maroa was to go north and Tri-Valley and all of them, and you avoid those perennial powers in 2A that you typically think of. I would not be shocked to see Nashville back in Bloomington.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people are starting to talk about down in that south area, southern region there, is that the Hornets are maybe being overlooked a little bit too much. I mean, maybe even these ratings are not truly showing what Nashville has as far as talent coming up. They're going to have the opportunity to show that and prove that. Probably one of the biggest games that stands out, a week 2 game with Carterville, a week 6 game with Benton, and then a week 8 game with DuQuoin, and then they wrap up the regular season with a Chester team that has made some recent noise here as well. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but like I said, Benton will probably be the highest rated team, but they don't even make the 3A top 15 ratings either. That just goes to speak to how deep Class 3A is this year, though. Something that we'll talk about here before long. But Nashville has a great schedule in front of them. Definitely pay attention to the Hornets as the season goes on. One of my favorite teams to talk about that I get a lot of crap from their TP talk are the Johnston City Indians. They come in at number 8 on the high school ratings system this year to open up. They were a semifinalist a season ago. Arguably a surprise semifinalist, so to speak. I mean, they got the number 1 seed in the playoffs, but they weren't really dealt a hard road to those semifinals, in my personal opinion. Probably the toughest team that they had to play along the way was Pena, who they met in the quarterfinals. They beat them by two touchdowns, but then took it on the chin to Maroa Forsyth in that semifinal game. Granted, that game was a little bit closer before Maroa Forsyth was able to open it up a little bit, but we all saw what Maroa Forsyth did at state as well. So, a lot of people, I've already heard some people saying, Johnson City was a potential state championship caliber team. It's like, no, they weren't. Maybe coming out of the South to get to the state championship game, but there was a lot of teams in that North bracket that if they had moved into that Southern bracket probably would have had their way as well. Looking at the disparity that there was in the bracket from North to South last season. That will likely change this year, though, as the South has a lot of representation in the state ratings in Class 2A this year.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. The BDC, the Black Diamond, it's notorious for its playoffs shortcomings, right? Johnstone City did a great job getting to semifinals last year. No one can take that away from them. That is theirs to keep. But it feels like year after year after year, even like when Cesar was a quarterfinalist for the first time, and no disrespect to them after like 20, 30 years, Greenfield blew them out, and they would go on to get, and Greenfield that same next week got blown out by a great Camp Point team that won state. It just kind of speaks to the shortcomings the Black Diamond has. And I say this as someone from Calhoun who played Cesar last year, and we only beat them 14-6 in a mud bowl, right? It's got to prove it at some point.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. I mean, you got to be able to win the games in front of you. That's first and foremost. And taking a look at Johnson City's schedule, there really isn't a reason why they shouldn't go 9-0. I think that the toughest game on their schedule right now, breaking it all down, will be that Week 9 matchup with Cesar Valier, which 2 years ago, TP Talk kind of made fun of me, or somebody from that site made fun of me for picking Cesar Valier over Johnson City when I put out our preview brackets, so to speak, our projected brackets. And then Cesar-Valliere did, in fact, beat Johnson City. Well, last year Johnson City returned the favor, but again, it was still a close game. And this year, Johnson City is going to open up as a touchdown favorite over Cesar-Valliere. So I think that game, those matchups are going to come as the season wears on. But that Week 9 matchup with Cesar-Valliere will be the biggest game for Johnson City on the schedule. They do open up with a White County team that always tends to be a tough opponent in the BDC. But when you take a big look at it, I mean, even Fairfield's kind of fallen off a little bit. Still a place I need to get to for a game, though. That's got a very unique setting as well as far as football fields across the state of Illinois in small school football. But Johnson City, very favorable schedule here in the BDC once again. They should go 9-0.
I don't disagree.
Looking at the number 9 team is Seneca. Seneca was 9-2 last year. They lost in the playoffs in the second round. They too come back this year. Coach Maxwell's there with the Fighting Irish. They open up the season with the defending state champion Chicago Christian Knights. And then they follow that up with another game in Week 5 against a Dwight team that had made the quarterfinals a season ago. They lost their they dissolved their co-op. They didn't lose it. They dissolved it. So Dwight is free of Gardner South Wilmington. That puts Dwight into the Class 1A field this year. But as you can see, they were not a team that we were talking about in Class 1A, despite being a 2A quarterfinalist a season ago. Another big game for Seneca is going to be a non-conference matchup in Week 9 with St. Joe Ogden. But when you take a look at the rest of this schedule here, outside of Chicago Christian and St. Joe Ogden, the rest of the schedule sees Seneca as the favorite in it. So this is setting up to be a good possibility for a 7-2 season, doubling back from an 8-1 season a year ago.
Yeah, another team who always seems to be in the playoffs, right? They're going to be solid again. They play a couple other playoff teams from last year, like Ottawa Marquette and I think you brought up Genoa Kingston. But that Ottawa Marquette game in week 6. That's an interesting one. It's on the road. Ottawa obviously has a new head coach this year, but they're always well coached and they're always very solid, even if they're not what they were about 6-7 years ago, maybe 10 now, when they were making semifinals, quarterfinal runs consistently. But they won a playoff game last year at 5-4.
Yeah. And don't call Marquette Ottawa. You'll piss off the Crew fans, because there's a difference between Ottawa and Marquette.
I'm sorry.
You know how it is. I get it. Being from this area, we always had Freeport Aquin, and I'd always be like, why do people always call it Freeport Aquin? It's just Aquin, but it makes sense. Ottawa Marquette makes sense as well. But Marquette, just think of them as Marquette.
It's tough because I got Alden Marquette by me.
I know. And so I had to take a look at that too. So Alton Marquette is Marquette Catholic. Ottawa Marquette is Marquette Academy. So still a Catholic school nonetheless, but little differences. We get that a lot with like West Central, and then there's a lot of teams that are actually called Central, or Unity, and you have to derive them by their town, otherwise you're not going to know what town or team you're talking about. But anyway, the next team we're going to talk about is El Paso Gridley, another HOIC team. The Titans were 6-4 a season ago, losing in the first round of the playoffs. Coach Tanner Benedict is back at the helm. Here again, another team that can make some noise. They do have some teams on their schedule that are definitely ranked above them. with the likes of Tri-Valley, GCMS, and Eureka. But outside of that, they have a pretty fairly surmountable schedule that could see them also getting back to the playoffs here in 2025.
It's a very favorable schedule. Like you said, outside of GCMS, Downs, Tri-Valley, and Eureka, I expect them to be a favorite over the rest of the teams that they play. They always seem to be a team that's in the playoffs, even if they don't make a run. Or they're always a team that you see pop up in 2A.
No doubt about that. The next team we'll talk about in Class 2A is Bismarck, Henning, Rossville, Allen. They kind of take a little bit of a bump down as they're the 11th highest rated team in Class 2A, and they're a team that are coming off of a quarterfinal appearance last year where they finished the season 11-1. They lost to Farmington in that quarterfinal game. They come back with a very, very favorable schedule this year. They are the favorite on their schedule to repeat at 9-0 again, but the biggest game will be that Week 2 game with Westville. Westville had a narrow loss to BHRA last year. Westville was 6-4 a season ago. There's a lot of people talking that Westville will be the actual favorite in this conference because of the amount of returning players that they have. Obviously, it will be a time test to see how that transpires, but BHRA is definitely going to be a team to watch for. They're definitely getting a lot of strength built back up on the line, hoping to establish more of a power run game presence. But right now, looking at their schedule, very favorable schedule once again. If they were to slip up in that Week 2 game with Westville, still a team that should end up at 8-1 and be another team to watch as we move into the Class 2A playoffs.
Yep. Again, another team. They're just a playoff or perennial playoff team. Every year, I think you see BHRA in the playoffs. It could be from 5-4 to 9-0. It doesn't really matter. They're coached well. They're always seemingly in the mix to do something in 2A.
Peatone is the next team we'll talk about. A season ago, they were in 3A. This year, they've dropped some enrollment. Right now, they are the highest enrolled school at the 2A cutoff, so they are technically a bubble team, but that is a bubble that we could potentially see go up rather than down, and that would make Wilmington fans happy. We'll talk about Wilmington later, but Peatone is definitely right now a team that is coming out of the ice that will be in that 2A field. Talking about Wilmington, they have to face Wilmington in Week 3. Some other games that stand out on their schedule include Coal City as well. A Lyle team that always tends to be a tough out in the not a tough out in the playoffs per se, but a tough out in their conference. And then a couple teams down there that could give them some fits, but realistically, the team to watch on this list is Wilmington. When you take a look at their schedule, Marengo is another team in Week 2 that could potentially give them some fits, Marengo being a 4A school. But, you're looking at a Peatone team that could definitely improve upon that 6-4 mark last year, could potentially be 7-2, if not 8-1, as we head into the 2025 playoff show this year.
Yep, a great schedule for them to get back to the playoffs, right? You said 6-3 or 7-2 seems to be very in the mix. Maybe even 8-1 if things bounce right. That big game for them that everyone's always going to keep an eye on because they're a perennial power, Wilmington. I mean, that's a great litmus test for where a team is, right? If you can compete with Wilmington most years, you're in a good spot.
100% there. Pana has a new head coach. Their previous head coach, Trevor Higgins, has stepped down. Enter in Hall of Fame coach Mark Ramsey, most notorious with Central A&M in the 90s and early 2000s, or most of the 2000s, and then again with St. Teresa in the late 2010s, where he took the Bulldogs to the state championship in 2016 and again in 2021, or was it 2022? Either way, they,
21.
yeah. Either way, you know they've been there, they've done that. Coach Ramsey's been in a lot of state championship games. He takes over a Pana team that was a 10-2 team last year, losing in the quarterfinals. They enter this year. I don't know exactly what they have back, but when you take a look at this schedule, you know, you have some teams on there that are typically in the mix. Vandalia doesn't show up on the charts this year at the current moment, but you know, again, another school that right now is a bubble school, but on the 3A side of it, they could be on the 2A side of it by the time we get there, with their enrollment sitting at 424. The Vandals are a team that are actually favored over Pana right now. Greenville in week 5 is another 3A school that we're not going to talk about in our 3A field, but another team that is definitely in the mix of things for that 3A field, and a favorite over Pana here. A North Mac team that's looking to get back in the mix, a team that used to be in the Sangamo, now in the South Central Conference. So it'll be a very interesting look. And then you have week 9 with Carlinville. You know, Carlinville is always a team that always seems to be in that playoff mix as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Pana comes back from this, coming off of an 8-1 regular season and a quarterfinal appearance. But realistically, you know, you're looking at a team that could be sitting again at that 6-3, 7-2 mark, and maybe they sneak one out of Vandalia or Greenville, if not both. It's not. You know, 9-0 is a possibility. Let's put it that way. But 8-1, 7-2 seem to be more realistic right now when you take a look at the preseason.
Yeah, it's not an overbearing schedule by any means. 8-1 and 7-2 seem to be a little more possible than the 9-0. But Coach Ramsey is obviously a great coach. My Calhoun Warriors obviously played his St. Teresa Bulldogs in that semifinal game in 2016. He's known for, if anyone can get Pana maybe back to, or I don't know back, but to that next level where they're pushing for deeper playoff runs than just the quarterfinals, I wouldn't bet against them.
Right, exactly. Let's look at Chester, another team that seems to be making some noise here as far as conference play goes. They were 9-2 a season ago. They come in at number 14 right now. And realistically, looking at their schedule, they should be 8-1 again as they enter the playoffs at the end of the year. Their biggest game is that week 9 game with Nashville. But they do have some good games with some potential playoff teams in Westland in week 5, Carlisle in week 6. DuPont was in the playoffs last year. They faced them in week 7. We've also seen Redbud in the playoffs in recent years. They're in week 8. So really, the back half of their schedule is where it gets to be really tough. But their toughest game as far as outlook goes is that week 9 matchup with Nashville. Very favorable schedule for the Chester Yellow Jackets here.
Yeah, they were a team that popped up on our radar last year, right? I know their game on that Saturday for playoff selection had implications for a couple different classes. That Nashville game is the one that sticks out. Obviously, you have DuPont and Redbud, who were playoff teams last year. Those are good tune-up games, especially if you expect them to be as good or similar or better than last year. Those are good tune-up games for that Week 9 matchup to get a litmus of where they are in 2A.
Yep, so expect to see Chester there. Westville is going to be the last team that we talk about in Class 2A. Coach Guy Goodluff got the Tigers back to the playoffs last year. They went 6-4, losing in the first round of Class 2A. A lot of hype around Westville this year. Like we already mentioned when we were talking about BHRA, Westville is a team that is looking at improving upon that record from a season ago, looking at easily an 8-1, if not 9-0 schedule out of the Tigers. It's been a while since we've seen Westville at the top of Class 2A. They had those back-to-back runner-up finishes back in 2006 and 2007 when Caleb Pratt was running the football for the Tigers in those years. But it's been a hard go for Westville since then. They have not been back to the state championship game, and they've had a couple teams that have gone 8-1 or 9-0, but have not made deep runs in the playoffs. So is this the year that Westville can turn it around? It's starting to look that way to start off the season, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Again, that Week 2 game with BHRA is going to be huge. They do have a good litmus test type game in Week 1 with Salt Fork, who Salt Fork always seems to be a team that can get into the playoffs as well. And then a couple other teams that they have on their schedule that have been in the playoffs in recent years include Moments in Week 3, Clifton Central in Week 6. They do have Oakwood in Week 5. Oakwood's always hit or miss, though. And then Iroquois West down in Week 9.
Yep, they're a team that, like you said, there's a lot of hype around them. Could they be the one to overtake BHRA in that conference? It's to be determined. It's a fun game to look at Week 2. It's definitely one that sets the tone early for a season, especially if it's a win that it can change the course of a season.
Yep, so a lot of positives here in Westville, and when you take a look at the lower teams here that we just talked about, from ratings 11 through 15, we're talking about teams that can either A, sustain, or B, improve on their records from a season ago. And that's why I said Class 2A is a very vulnerable class, because we're talking about teams that are going to go 8-1, 9-0, and they're not even in the top 10 of the ratings. But it's going to be, to me, this is going to be the most fun class to watch this year. And I've said that before already.
I think it's the most unpredictable outside of the top two, because you just really you don't know until you know.
We'll cut to our final discussion and cover Class 3A when we return right after this.
Are you looking to upgrade your concrete floor? Look no further than Diedrich Epoxy, the team that turns ordinary floors into durable, beautiful surfaces that last. Whether it's your garage, basement, shop, or commercial space, Diedrich Epoxy delivers a finish that's tough enough for heavy use and stylish enough to make your space stand out. Don't settle for boring, worn-out concrete. Upgrade with Diedrich Epoxy today. Call 815-239-1158 to get your free quote. Diedrich Epoxy, your floor upgraded. Are you looking to raise funds for your program? Look no further than Leading Edge Fundraising, helping teams and programs raise more with less hassle. Whether you're gearing up for a new season or trying to hit a financial goal, Leading Edge has the tools, products, and experience to get you there. From youth clubs to varsity programs, they've helped teams across Illinois maximize profits and minimize stress. Want fundraising that actually works? Go with the local experts who know how to win off the field too. Contact Brandon at 563-514-1647. Leading Edge Fundraising, raising the standard. Reach out today and take your program to the next level.
Logan, taking a look at Class 3A, it looks to be loaded once again. So much so that some teams we talk about regularly won't even show up on the top 10 teams in the ratings this year. You have last year's 1A and 2A state champs in Althoff Catholic and Chicago Christian receiving multipliers and getting moved into 3A this year, coupled with a heavy favorite in State Power and Byron. And then you have IC Catholic losing enrollment and dropping back into the 3A field this year. Now, speaking of IC Catholic, I've seen some people stating multiple things. One, that IC Catholic was complaining about being in 4A and lost the multiplier. That is 100% false. IC Catholic never once complained about being in 4A. They were a 4-5 team last year, coming out of a very tough conference. Their enrollment drop is what caused them to drop into 3A, because they are still tagged with the multiplier as of right now. Two, that the IHSA finally brought the multiplier back. That, too, is another false statement, as the IHSA has always had the multiplier in place, but when they reformatted the 2-year enrollment cycle back in 2019, you had to have 3 wins as a requirement to receive the multiplier over a course of that 2-year season, which allowed it to become an easier waiver for private schools. Now, after the debacle that we seen last year in the state championship games, IHSA went back, reformatted it to a 1-year enrollment cycle, and the multiplier being changed to where you have to win 1 playoff game over a 3-year window, and if you do so, now you get tagged with that multiplier, of which we've seen 30 additional teams get tagged with the multiplier this year, which brings a little bit more parity across all the classifications between public and privates.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier. The multiplier never left. COVID screwed everything up with that. That's what happened there. That's the simplest explanation. There was no playoffs for 1 year, and teams that would have had the multiplier because they would have been in the playoffs didn't get it because of COVID and then how the enrollment system was set up and how they did the cycling.
Agreed there. So, needless to say, when we take a look at Class 3A, this is definitely going to be one of the toughest classifications in small school football, but it could be one of the toughest classifications in the entire state. Obviously, we always know that your 7A and 8A classifications are always really, really tough with a lot of great programs in those 2 classifications. But 3A this year is extremely loaded. I mean, we talked about 3A being loaded last year, but this year that window's even larger, because when you take a look at the big scheme of things, Montini Catholic ran away with the state championship as we expected. Their closest game in the playoff run was to Byron, which was a 14-13 win at the final play of the game. And then they had a tough Princeton team that gave them everything that they could handle in the semifinals as well. In the quarterfinals. And then Wilmington tried to give them as much as they could, but ultimately did not have enough in the tank for that either. But when you break that down, Montini Catholic is now back up into Class 5A, where they probably should have always been all along. But I have great respect for Montini, as they do run a very great program, one that's always talked about highly in the state. With that, you have IC Catholic dropping back in, which we just talked about. But your number 1 team to start off the year is a state power that's come about over the past decade in the Byron Tigers.
Not really, no surprise here. They're always in the talk of 3A. They're always really good. It seems like every year they're always making a deep run. I know last year they lost in the second round, but I think we can all agree that game was probably the state title game in the second round, and probably should have never have even happened there if we had 1 through 32, like we should. But that's another topic. They keep the Talbert kid and they keep Considine. I mean, those are that's 2 of the better players in 3A right there, and they just reload every year. They seem to get better every year. It does not matter what year it is.
Yes, I mean, Byron's definitely going to be one of the top teams to talk about in Class 3A, as they have been over the past several years. Taking a look at their schedule, really, the only team on their schedule that could potentially give them fits is the Week 2 game against Dixon. That game was a classic game a season ago that Byron snuck out the win on. But with that said, Byron, to me, returns more people than what Dixon has this year, but still going to be a very tough physical football game there. And then their Week 6 matchup with Dupec. This is a different looking Dupec team. Normally we see Dupec littered among the top 10 in Class 3A. This year they are not. Right now, they don't even make the Class 3A top 15 state ratings. They are, however, listed in receiving votes in our NUIC football.com state rankings. With that, though, they do have a new head coach and a different system. It'll be interesting to see what DuPec does here because DuPec will be moving into this conference next year. So this is a great opportunity for DuPec to get a taste of the Big Northern, something that they have been familiar with in the past couple years as they've played Oregon, they've played Genoa Kingston, they played Stillman Valley, all in the playoffs, all DuPec wins. Really, when you take a look at the Big Northern, the only team that DuPec's losing to is Byron. And likewise, Dixon could be that other team that could give DuPec fits in the future, provided that they can continue to sustain their recent success. All right, let's take a look at the next team, IC Catholic. Oh, gotta love having IC Catholic back in Class 3A. But I will say this about them. They are a very respectable program and a team that Coach Kreft has always has them prepared for a big opportunity. They have, realistically, they have the toughest schedule out of any team in Class 3A. They open up in St. Louis. They open up at home with St. Mary's Southside Catholic out of St. Louis. That'll be a tough matchup. They also have St. Iggy on their schedule. Nazareth Academy's on their schedule. St. Francis is on their schedule. St. Viator's on schedule. St. Rita's on schedule. Chicago Marist is on schedule. So no surprise here as the Chicago Catholic League is obviously there's multiple divisions of the Chicago Catholic League, but the majority of them are your big time perennial powers. I see Catholic coming out of one of those with Nazareth Academy, who's won a couple state championships here recently. Wheaton St. Francis has been there. St. Rita was just there a couple years ago. St. Viator is always a team to watch for. This is definitely a tough schedule for IC Catholic, but coming off of a 4-5 season, I think this is a schedule that could potentially see them hit 5 wins. It's just where are they going to come at?
Yeah, it's all about where their draw is, right? And I think I speak for just about everyone when I say we do not want a Byron and IC Catholic first round matchup.
Unfortunately, that could be a real possibility.
That is a real possibility. Unfortunately, they'll be battle tested. I mean, you have 8A Power and Chicago Marist, St. Rita, who's always strong, Nazareth, who's won back-to-back state titles or something like that. I think both games against Joliet Catholic. Tim Rackey's just a wizard over there. They're going to be battle tested and they're going to be battle ready in the playoffs.
Tim Rackey racking up state championships. Had like 3 or 4 at Addison Driscoll before he left there, and then started building Naz up to where it's at. Obviously, put together some great teams over the years. Had a 5-4 team that won state here a couple years ago. A 4-5 team that won state. I think the 5-4 team state champion was that last year, and then the 4-5 was the year before that. Either way, they weren't expected to win state, but came through and won it anyway. Yes, mastermind coach, obviously one of the best in the state in IHSA history, but part of that though too is he gets a little bit of criticism because all of his state championships are with Catholic schools. So they want to see how good of a coach he really is, and the talk is get into a public school system and see how you can perform there. That'll tell us how good of a coach you really are. Regardless, you still have to be a very good coach, even if you're at a Catholic school, to get the program up to where you want it to be.
talent only goes so far.
Yes, it does. All right, the next team are the Wilmington Wildcats. Wilmington, again, on the proverbial bubble to be in Class 3A or Class 2A. They won state championships in Class 2A not too long ago. Last year, they got to the 3A semifinals after coming off of a state championship in 2023. In Class 2A. Last year, they get back to the semifinals in Class 3A, where they lost to Montini Catholic. This year, you take a look at their schedule. Heavy favorites to go 9-0 once again, so not a big surprise here for Coach Reintz and his team as they look to land another ICE conference title.
That week 1 matchup with Morris is an intriguing one. It's much like with Lena Linslow and Rochelle this year. It's a big time match. It's a big matchup. It's a smaller school versus a bigger school. Morris made I think at the 5A quarterfinals last year.
Yep.
5A quarterfinals last year. I think they expect to be really good again this year. That's a really good week 1 game. If Wilmington wins it, the confidence just goes through the roof for them.
Well, that's just it. I mean, the Redskins are always a team to watch and talk about. They have a lot of history there. They were 8-5 a season ago. So actually, they lost in the semifinals.
Semis.
Yeah. And their enrollment is down to 853 now, which, if memory serves me right, would most likely leave them or could get them into the 4A playoffs this year, depending on which way the cut goes. So that'll be, like you said, that is a very big game there. So I take back that they have a 9-0 record coming because Morris will definitely give them a challenge out of the gate. So we could see Wilmington be 8-1. But outside of that week 1 matchup, Wilmington will definitely have a favorable schedule the rest of the way. But I like the fact that they're stepping out, like you said, with Lena Winslow with Rochelle. Wilmington taking on a Morris team where we're talking about a Wilmington team that could potentially fall back into Class 2A, taking on a 5A team that made the semifinals a season ago. So, man, it will be a lot of fun to see that. Althoff Catholic, our favorite Catholic school, returns back to Class 3A after winning a 1A state champion. Yes, you heard that right. A 1A state championship last year. They're back in 3A this year. 4th highest rated team in Class 3A, coming off of a 1A state championship. And when you take a look at their schedule, it's the same thing that we heard a lot about last year. They got a lot of bigger schools on their calendar here. Alton's Alton. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Always somehow have a good amount of athletes. It's just whether or not they can win. Collinsville there in week 6 is always a team that is tough. Modern Day in recent years has been tough. They too also get hit with the multiplier. Will likely fall into the 4A field now, but they too are a bubble team. They could still slide back into Class 3A. That St. Mary's Southside Catholic School out of St. Louis is on their schedule. And then they end the year with Caneland, a team that they beat narrowly a season ago. Not quite the Division I talent at Althoff this year as they had last year, and really haven't heard a whole lot about 10 other recruits moving in either.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. If you go through their social media and you do a little bit of digging, you can see that they definitely had kids transfer in from like Muscuda and other surrounding areas. So who really knows how much better or how good they will be? That's no disrespect to them. You just don't know. They lost 14, 15 kids and one of the best players in the country to Oregon. It is what it is. It's the same thing last year. A bunch of bigger schools, but it's not exactly an overwhelming schedule. That Caneland game's interesting. Caneland was a solid 6A school last year. They lost their first-round playoff game by 2 scores, but the Hill kid didn't even play in that game.
Yeah, so that'll be very interesting there. Um, you know, Althoff is going to have opportunities clearly on their schedule to be right back in the mix of what we're expecting out of them. But the move up to Class 3A will definitely be much more their style, so to speak. A team that we're talking about next is Tolono Unity. They're under a new head coach this year, Tony Reitz. They're coming off of a semifinal appearance in Class 3A where they lost to conference rival Monticello. Taking a look, here we are. We're getting ready to talk about all these Illini Prairie teams. And when you take a look at the Illini Prairie, even under a new head coach, Tolono Unity was a semifinalist to Monticello a season ago, but they walk in this year as the favorites to win the Illini Prairie this season.
And don't forget, that game ended in controversy, too, that semifinal game. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I think Unity should have had another unplayed down or untimed down. They didn't get it. I might be wrong, but there was controversy at the end of that game.
That's right. I remember that. And I think you're right. I think the refs blew that one. Either way, it ended up in Monticello's favor, and Monticello brought a trophy home.
That's right.
But speaking of Monticello, not only are they the next team we're going to talk about, but they have a Week 2 matchup with Tolono Unity. Those two teams are the clear-cut favorites in the Illini Prairie this season. But then they also follow that up with a Week 3 game with Bloomington Central Catholic, a Week 4 game against St. Joe Ogden, and then they have Prairie Central and Paxton Buckley Lotus sitting there in Weeks 6 and 7 as well. Definitely not an easy schedule for the Rockets, but a schedule nonetheless that should be pretty favorable for the Rockets, even with a new head coach.
Yeah, definitely a favorable schedule for Tolono Unity. Coach Hamilton did a great job building up the culture there and turning them into a perennial 3A team that's primed for deep runs. That PBL game, St. Joe's Ogden and BCC are the ones that are going to stick out the most people. Especially that St. Joe's Ogden game. They lost to them last year in the regular season but beat them in the playoffs. I'm sure that game will have a little more behind it for St. Joe's and Tolono Unity, and the same thing can go for that Week 2 matchup with Monticello and Tolono.
So speaking of Monticello, Cullen Walter, who used to lead the Aledo Green Dragons to state championships and runner-ups quite a few times in the years, went back to Monticello, a school that really didn't see a whole lot of football success, and now they're constantly being talked about a team as they won state in 2018, were state runner-ups just a season ago, and like we already stated, an always tough Illini Prairie Conference that has seen a lot of state championship caliber teams, but hasn't really brought home a lot of state championships. I mean, when you think about this conference, Tolono Unity and St. Joe Ogden stand out the most as they have the most appearances at state, but collectively they're 0-12 at state. Monticello's been there twice. They're 1-1 in state. Bloomington Central Catholic's been there a couple times, and I can't remember if they've won anything. But, it's been a long time since Paxton's been in a state championship too. Either way, though, always great football in this conference. It's a relatively young conference too. Most of these teams used to be part of the old OCAW conference that Tuscola and Moreau Forsyth used to be in as well. And that was definitely a dogfight style conference back then. And since moving into the Illini Prairie, a lot of these teams have kept up that same pace. Monticello, like we talked about, has that Week 2 game with Tolono Unity. Week 5, they have BCC. Week 6, St. Joe Ogden. And then they finish out the regular seasons in Week 8 and 9 with Prairie Central and Paxton Buckley Loda as well.
Yeah, not exactly an easy schedule, but it's a battle. They're gonna be battle tested. They had 3 losses last year, counting that state title game. So that means that they had 2 in the regular season before that. Um, Coach Walter does a great job over there. Great coaches can win anywhere. You just know how to coach and you can win. Getting talent helps, but he's going to continue to keep Monticello in the picture here in 3A, I bet.
So moving back into the track, the Three Rivers Athletic Conference, we're talking about the Princeton Tigers. No surprise here, Princeton coming in at number 7 in the state ratings this year. The Tigers are, again, the favorites to come out of the track once again in their respective division. But they have a team knocking right on their heels in Monmouth-Roseville. Kiwani's another team that will be looking to get back into the playoffs. They also have some good crossover games with Sterling Newman Central Catholic, Rock Ridge, and Erie Prophetstown. All teams looking to get back into the playoffs again this year. But when you break it down, Princeton's one of those teams that we collectively talk about routinely since Coach Pearson's taken over this program. And I was talking to Greg Armstrong from View from the West. He is 68-19 in his time at Princeton, but every year they get as far as they can get, and they lose to Byron, they lose to Montini Catholic, they lose to IC Catholic. They're always right there, but can just never get over the hump. And here we are talking about them once again as a favorite in the 3A North, albeit it'll be a much tougher 3A North. But if Wilmington were to drop down into Class 2A, which is still possible, not saying that Wilmington's any much better than Princeton, right now there is a little bit of a gap there, though. But you got Byron and IC Catholic sitting right there again for the Tigers.
Yeah, just again, you talked about it. They're the favorites in their respective track division. Obviously, Erie Prophets, Monmouth-Roseville, Sterling Newman, and Rockridge. Those are all tough games for them. And I'm assuming they're a favorite in all of them. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say they're favored in all of them. I expect another deep playoff run, or deep playoff run potential, barring that they don't run into a nemesis like a Byron or an IC Catholic, as an example. They're always right there. We talked about earlier. They gave Montini their second toughest game of the playoff run in a 24-7 loss. We know how good Byron and Montini were. That speaks to the volumes of the quality of team that Princeton is and carries year in and year out.
Absolutely. A new team to the 3A field this year will be Richmond Burton, a regular in Class 4A. I knew this was going to be coming before too long as they continue to see enrollment decline at the school, as they're looking at even dropping into Class 2A in other, or they are actually in 2A in other sports already. With that, they are now going to be in Class 3A in football. They were the 4A state champions not too long ago, back in 2019. And, you take a look at their schedule this year, and they were 7-3 a season ago, losing in the first round of the 4A playoffs. And entering 2025, they have a very, not a favorable schedule per se, because their conference is always tough, but when you break it down, they have a schedule that sees them as a favorite for a lot of the games. I mean, one of the top teams that they play happens again, another Week 2 matchup with Coal City. They have another playoff team in Week 3 with Johnsburg. And then, you have Woodstock North on the schedule. It'll be interesting to see what Richmond Burton does. Coach Knoll's been there for quite a long time now, has had a lot of great success with the Rockets. But here we are, another team that could potentially be looking at a 9-0 record from an improvement of a 7-3 record a season ago.
Yeah, they're going to be tough. they definitely at 9-0 is not out of the possibility. That Coal City game week 2 is an interesting one, and then which one was it? That's the big matchup for them. It's going to be the game that probably decides if they're 8-1 or 9-0. Them dropping from 4A all the way into 3A now, it's just another great team into this loaded class that we already talked about.
New to the Class 3A field again is Chicago Christian. The Class 2A state champs a season ago under head coach CJ Cesario returns. And while they have to replace a lot of good talent that has graduated, one of the things that Coach Cesario was talking about was developing a culture that would continue to produce success. And while we'll see new names populate the Knights roster this season, his expectations are to continue to build upon that state championship that they were able to bring home a season ago. They come in at number 9 in this year's 3A ratings. And when you take a look at this schedule here, they open up the gates as a 2-touchdown favorite over Seneca, but that'll be a great matchup for these two teams to open up the season in. Their lone loss last year came to Wheaton Academy, the team that they're going to see in Week 3. Week 4, they have Bishop McNamara, a team that is starting to gain traction. Bishop Mac, again, will be right on that 3A, 4A bubble with a high probability of potentially falling into Class 3A, as we can see that proverbial line go up rather than down this year. Just taking a look at where it currently sits, I could see the Fighting Irish falling into Class 3A as well. Marion Central Catholic sitting there in Week 5 as a team that is going to be looking to get back to the playoffs. We've heard a lot about Marion Central Catholic over the last few years. They had the big tight end, the Betancourt kid, who went to Clemson. But with that, they really haven't produced. They've always looked like a team that could be a team to reckon with, but the physicality has never lived up to that. They've been pushed around, whether it be in Class 1A, Class 2A, and now they're going to be in Class 3A. But when you look at the rest of this schedule for Chicago Christian, their next biggest games come in Week 7 with Aurora Christian and Week 9 with Chicago Hope. That Week 8 game, though, with Christ the King. Christ the King was kind of a surprise team last year as well. They kind of had a couple games there that surprised you off of a team not too long ago that was really a doormat and really a walkover. But that'll be interesting to see if they've continued to improve. But I mean, they don't populate anything that we're talking about, so it'll be interesting to see, like I said. But Chicago Hope too, with the multiplier now, makes the jump from 1A up to 3A as well. So that'll be interesting to see. Chicago Hope has never really had a lot of surmountable success, and moving into the 3A playoff field will likely be a big thing for both these schools, really, Chicago Christian and Chicago Hope.
Yeah, Chicago Christian, Coach Cesario did a great job on them last year, and he talked about building a culture, right? I know they replace a lot. I think they only have one starter back on both sides of the ball. He's young. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I fully expect them to be in the mix of 3A playoffs. I won't say repeat as state champions at 2A and 3A. I won't say that. But he used to coach at Chicago Mount Carmel, and when you have a former Heisman finalist in Jordan Lynch and Vandy commit and Jake Elliott vouching for you, it speaks volumes to the type of coach he is and the talent and the capability he is of getting the most out of these young men for Chicago Christian.
Yep, so very excited to see how the Knights come back from that state championship run, and look forward to see what Coach Cesario does there. Moving back into the Illini Prairie is St. Joe Ogden as they come in at number 10. Again, we've talked a lot about this conference already. Coach Skinner's done a great job taking over the reins for the Spartans after the departure of Coach Duval a couple years ago. Obviously, Coach Duval passed away here recently, or a little while ago now. But Coach Skinner's definitely kept up with the culture that Coach Duvall had laid down. The Spartans were 10-0 last year before losing in the second round a rematch game with Tolono Unity. And that was a game that you saw in the regular season that you thought could go the other way as well. I think I picked that upset too, because I felt like Tolono Unity in that game when we were talking on our playoff show last year would be a big game, provided it played out, which it did, and Tolono Unity made it pay. And I had Tolono Unity as a favorite getting to the state championship game, but Monticello disrupted that in the semifinal game that we already talked about as well. So St. Joe Ogden is looking at going from a 9-0 record right now, projected probably at 7-2. Obviously, there's ways where they could go 8-1. There's ways that they could go 6-3 as well. It's really going to be a tough call here, but this Illini Prairie Conference, as we've already stated, is going to be very tough. They open up the season with Prairie Central in Week 1, PBL in Week 2, Tolono Unity in Week 4, and Monticello in Week 6, BCC in Week 7, and then they have a non-conference game with Seneca sitting there in Week 8 too. So, this is a very, very loaded schedule for St. Joe Ogden with a lot of returning playoff teams on it.
Definitely challenging themselves. Obviously, you want to challenge yourself every single year, especially if you're not in a closed conference where you can schedule some non-conference games outside of it. We'll see what they can be. We'll see what they're made of this year. They went 10-1 last year. Hopefully, they can do a little more this year, and I fully expect them to be in the mix of 3A South.
We're going to move up the road, but stay in the Illini Prairie. We're going up to BCC, where the Saints come off of a 5-5 record. Coach Brock has his team ready to go again. They were in 2A just a season ago, but they have definitely, they've been tagged with the multiplier, bumping them into Class 3A now, where we've typically seen them play at. So no stranger there. But they, too, have a very, very tough schedule. Again, opening up with PBL in Week 1, Week 3, Tolono Unity, Week 5, Monticello, Week 7, they have St. Joe Ogden, and then Week 9, Prairie Central. So they probably have the most balanced out schedule out of all the teams here in the Illini Prairie. But when you take a look at where they're projected at, 5-5 last year, so 5-4 regular season, could see them play into a 6-3 regular season. It could see them stay at 5-4 at the same time because PBL's not that far behind them either. So that Week 1 game will be huge for both teams to start the season on.
Yeah, it goes every game matters, right? You only get one of them, one per week, and one being 5-4 versus 6-3 is a lot different. Gives you most times you'll get a better draw at 6-3 than you would at 5-4. So be interesting to see how it shakes out for them.
A team that we're used to seeing in the top 10 comes in at number 12, and that's the Bullets of Williamsville. We've already talked a little bit about Williamsville in the Class 2A segment about being a team that would be a challenge for Maroa Forsyth. Williamsville is the defending Sangamo Conference champions. Their lone loss in the regular season was to Byron last year, but they did get bounced in the second round of the playoffs a season ago. Again, a very favorable schedule here in a tough conference, but very favorable schedule for Williamsville that could see them going either 8-1 or 9-0 again. It'll be interesting to see how it transpires. Riverton was the reason why they played Byron. Riverton did not field a team last year. I have not heard if they're being able to field a team this year. So my speculation is that they will have a varsity team this year. That's their Week 3 opponent. Not that it matters much because I don't see them competing with Coach Coons and his Bullets. But that Maroa-Forsyth matchup is the big one, and that is coming in Week 8, like we already talked about, at the Boyd in Maroa.
Yeah, again, I think this speaks to the volume how good 3A really is this year, where you have a perennial power in 3A in Williamsville, and they're ranked number 12 right now.
Yeah.
Just a gauntlet of a class.
Which, in its own right, makes it a very fun one to watch as well.
Yes.
Especially when you're taking a look at projections and things like that. But another team, again, that we talked a lot about in recent years are the Hornets of Eureka. They're coming in at number 13. And, again, an HOIC team. They were 9-2 a season ago, so 8-1 regular season. Lost in the second round of the 3A playoffs. And when you look at their schedule, the game that stands out the most is Week 3 against Farmington and then Week 9 against Tri-Valley. Those will be big games for the Hornets when you break down their schedule. And if you really look further, their first 4 games are all non-conference games. So it's the last half of the schedule from Week 5 through Week 9 where Eureka has all of their conference games laid out in. So you're looking at a team that could be 4-0 or 3-1 heading into conference play, and then going right into that, they should be sitting potentially 6-1 or 7-0. Or I'm sorry, it's Week 9 when they play Tri-Valley. They should be sitting at 7-1 or 8-0 when they go into that Week 9 matchup.
Yeah, definitely a very favorable, first 4 games. Obviously, that Farmington game will be tough. That's no gimme. But you look at that back half. There's a real shot there's 7-1 or 8-0 going into that Week 9 matchup against Downs Tri-Valley.
And I don't want to forget, but they do have El Paso Gridley in Week 7, which will be another tough game as well, as El Paso Gridley and Eureka always tend to have a good game going back and forth between those two. Johnsburg comes in at number 14. Last year, the Skyhawks were in Class 4A, lost in the first round. Another school that's lost a lot of enrollment coming into the one-year enrollment cycle. They're down to 467, which places them more on the lower end of Class 3A now from a team that was in the 4A playoffs a season ago. And when you take a look at their first 2 games right off the bat, they have Thornwood and Addison Trail, both teams that are 3 times the size of their school enrollment. So that'll be interesting to see how those games play out for the Skyhawks. But Week 3, they have that matchup with Richmond Burton, who we already talked about being one of the favorites in the conference, if not the favorite in the conference. And then still, again, tough games. Woodstock North, Woodstock, Marengo, all sandwiched in there between Weeks 5 and Week 8.
Yeah, definitely an interesting schedule. It'll be tough for them, playing a couple bigger schools. They'll be on the lower end, like you said, of 3A. Definitely a team to keep an eye on, especially if they can improve on what they did last year, given the schedule they play and versus the size of some of these opponents. A team that could come out of nowhere for some.
100%. The last team we're going to talk about tonight, Prairie Central, back in the Illini Prairie to finish off the night. Imagine that. They were 5-5 a season ago, losing in the first round of the 3A playoffs. They'll find themselves, obviously, again in 3A. But this year, taking a look projection-wise, they're projected to go 4-5 here, Logan. So they're going to have to pull off an upset somewhere, whether it be St. Joe Ogden, PBL, Tolono Unity, Monticello, or BCC. And looking at their schedule, again, another school in the Illini Prairie with a pretty well-balanced schedule. St. Joe Ogden in Week 1, PBL in Week 4, Unity in Week 6, and then Weeks 8 and 9, you have Monticello and BCC sitting there as teams that, they could be looking at a 3-4 4-3 record going into those last 2 games, needing to grab 1 or 2 wins to seal off that 5th win to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely not an easy road to 5 wins for Prairie Central this year. They have to play St. Joe's, PBL, Monticello, Tolono, BCC, like we've talked about. They got to find a way to steal one of them, right? That's how you get in, and it'll be tough because, like we said, the Illini Prairie it's a really good conference, but if they can find a way to snatch a win from someone, they'll be in.
Yeah, Prairie Central got the hard road last year. They were the team that was expected to go 4-5. They did pull off an upset somewhere, just to be rewarded with that first round playoff game on the road at Byron where they got spanked. I got to go to that game because that was a Friday night game last year in the first round of the playoffs. So it was my first time attending a Byron and a Prairie Central game, and it was definitely a lot of fun before the game started, but you could definitely see the differential between the upper echelon of 3A and where Prairie Central was by the end of the game. So not to say that Prairie Central is bad by any stretch of the imagination. It just speaks more to the volumes of how far ahead Byron is from the rest of the class of 3A, with the exception of the Catholic schools that always seem to run amok in Class 3A as well. So that gives you a look at Class 1A, 2A, and 3A as far as the high school ratings go. And Logan, like we talked about before, it's great to see IHSA make some changes this year. You have the multiplier back in effect. There's 44 schools tagged with the multiplier this year, where over the last 2 years there was only 14 schools tagged with the multiplier. Going back to a 1-year enrollment cycle is great as well. And then really the biggest thing is if you win a playoff game in 3 consecutive years, as long as you win 1 playoff game, you know that you're not going to get the waiver reprieve going into the coming season. So it'll be interesting to see how long this stays the course. But that, coupled with the classification movements in other sports where it's a 300, 700, and 1600 cutoff to separate 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A, this really gives us a better look of how the classifications will break up. Obviously, football still being the outlier because it's still going to be the top 254 teams that make the cut. But there are more conversations going around to add an additional round to the playoffs, which would take it from 254 to 386 or something like that for the playoff field. If that were to be the case, that would only leave about 37% of the teams out of the football playoff field, whereas right now it's sitting at more like 47%. So will that take place? I don't know. Me personally, I hope it doesn't, because like many people, I feel that the playoffs are kind of watered down at the moment to begin with, and by extending the playoff field out again, I mean, yeah, you could potentially get some 3 and 6 teams that are going to upset some other teams. Don't get me wrong. There are 3 and 6 teams out there that are better than their record. But how many of them are going to make that actually happen is the real question. And, with it sitting where it's at right now, where you're already getting 4 and 5 at-large bid teams in the playoffs. Granted, we have seen a 4 and 5 team win a state championship already, but that was a Nazareth Academy team coming out of the Chicago Catholic League. So you can't bank on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not exactly. I'm not for it. I don't want an extra round to the playoffs. It waters it down more than what it already is, and I hope it doesn't happen, because it's just it adds. I think they take away a regular season game if they do that now. So you lose a regular season game. I'm just not for it.
It'll be very interesting to see how everything plays out. I think we got a good look at 1A through 3A across the state. There's obviously a lot of teams to watch here that will definitely be very exciting to see how this all matriculates. I'm ready to get the season kicked off. Obviously, we'll be back next week with our preview of week 1, where we'll actually start breaking down the games. If you haven't already, our state rankings are out there. They're on our website at nuicfootball.com. You can also take a look at previous posts in NUIC Football on Facebook and on Twitter, where we have a full scope of the class rankings with teams 1 through 10 and then those receiving votes, whereas on our website it's only going to be teams 1 through 10 that are going to be listed there. But we have a lot more coming up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Logan, thank you for coming on the show. I'm excited to have you on this year on a weekly basis, because I think that we can definitely start to provide more coverage throughout the state, but get more information from week to week and really hone in on these teams that we expect to be making the playoffs at the same time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'm looking forward to it. It's just another thing on my plate that I get to do outside of now football practice that I help out at in school. I get to do this. It's a football centric time for me, so I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, we'll get more stuff coming out your way, but as always, root for the NUIC.